to our special presentation of NHS Talks. This is the first in our NHS Talks Stories series, and that's a distinction that we will explain for you in a moment. We have some very special guests today to discuss church and community historic perspectives, and we have a special announcement that we wanted to start with, but before that, we're very honored to have with us Metropolitan Gerasimos, and I don't see him on the screen right now. We wanted to start with an opening prayer.
Yeah.
Okay, Metropolitan, please lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of Truth, who are in all places and fills all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Your Eminence. And as I said, we have a wonderful panel with us today. They include His Eminence, Metropolitan Gerasimos of San Francisco, Antonis Diamataras, publisher of the National Herald newspaper, and professor, journalist, and author Alexandra Kitroeff, a history professor at Haverford College. And our topic today is church and community historic perspectives. But first, we do have that special announcement, and I want to turn the program over to Drake Barakis, who is chair of the National Hellenic Society, along with his family. They are renowned philanthropists in the Greek American community and in New England. And John Kalamos, the founder and chairman of Kalamos Investments, a global diversified investment fund. John is considered the father of the convertible bond, a retired decorated Air Force pilot and Vietnam veteran, chairman of the board of trustees of the National Hellenic Museum. And Drake, I understand we have a great joint venture to announce today.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, John. And thank you for everyone today for joining us. One of the founding principles of the National Hellenic Society, an organization dedicated to the protection, preservation, and perpetuation of our Hellenic heritage, is the understanding that, one group, one organization can't do it all for our community. And so we're always open to partner and collaborate with like-minded organizations that complement our mission. And we've had a long-standing relationship with the National Hellenic Museum, and we've solidified a very important critical project of theirs called the Oral History Project, which forever compiles, records, and archives the history of Greek America, which will forever be preserved at the museum and is currently already in process and archived at the museum. And it will be it continues to be and serve as a national repository of the Greek American story for perpetuity and generations to enjoy, learn from, and honor, obviously, our forebearers and also the multiple generations that have developed and continue to build our community here in the States. The National Hellenic Society has trained over hundreds of our membership, more importantly, our Heritage Greece alumni students, to assist the museum in reaching out to everyone across this country who has a story to tell. And so whether it's first generation, second generation to current generations, it can be organizations, it can be churches, parishes. We have a lot of parishes, particularly back here on the East Coast, that have celebrated 100-year anniversaries. We want to make sure that that information, that history is preserved and digitized for the rest of humanity. And we've come together with the museum to partner and really take on that strategy and move this even forward to the many stories that are out there that we have not been able to reach out to yet. So it's our pleasure to work with the museum. I'd like to turn it over to the chairman of Kalamos Investments, but more importantly, chairman and major benefactor of the National Hellenic Museum, John Kalamos.
Thank you, Drake. The National Hellenic Museum is proud to partner with the National Hellenic Society to record and archive these stories. One of the missions of the National Hellenic Museum is to document and provide our history to coming generations and the importance of our Greek heritage. Especially in today's world, it's important that we have a sense of their heritage. Remember, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you came from. In today's talk, the importance of the history of the Greek Orthodox Church is extremely important, especially to our youth. We hope this history will motivate them to learn more and become faithful to our heritage. The National Hellenic Museum will have an exhibit to make sure that it will be part of their experience when they come to the museum. We hope it motivates them to join the church and their faith. It's extremely important when I talk to the youth, so many are not in our faith. It's important that we motivate them to do so. So we're really pleasure to be working with Drake and Art and the National Hellenic Society on this. Thank you.
As I was saying, thank you, John, and thank you, Drake, for that announcement. And it's a very exciting joint venture, and we're looking forward to starting it today. Let me begin with His Eminence. Before I do that, let me just note that today is the name day of His Holiness, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. So we wish the Ecumenical Patriarch Chronia Pola. And it's my pleasure now to introduce His Eminence Metropolitan Gerasimos of San Francisco. He's been overseeing the Greek Orthodox metropolis there since his enthronement in April of 2005. The region includes 67 parishes in Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. And he has served as a clergyman in the Archdiocese of America for more than 40 years. He was born in Kalamata, Greece. He came to the United States to further his education, which includes a bachelor's degree from Hellenic College, a Master of Divinity from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, and a PhD in Counseling and Social Psychology from Boston College. He was ordained to the diaconate in 1979, and he served as archdeacon to Archbishop Iakovos for 17 years. During this time, he also held several administrative positions at Holy Cross Hellenic College, including Dean of Students and Director of Admissions and Records, while also teaching courses in psychology and teleturgics. And he has served as Chief Secretary of the Holy Eparchial Synod for the Archdiocese. I could go on, Your Eminence, but we want to hear from you. So please share your wisdom with us.
I'm not sure what can. Thank you, John. First of all, thank you for a very, very lofty introduction. I'm humbled, but I'm humbled and honored to be in the presence of all of you, especially to have a conversation about a subject matter that is of a crucial importance, not today, not 40 years ago, but more than that, from the beginning of the institution of the Greek American experience in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century. I think I got something about that John Calamos, my dear friend, said about preserving the Greek heritage. That has still not been defined what it is, what parts of Greek heritage we're talking about when it comes to the church. But today, we are been together here now trying to decipher something in the occasion of Dr. Kitroeff's book, which I urge everyone to buy it because it's a fascinating understanding from sociological point of view, but also historical point of view, our discovery of America as Greek Americans, as Greeks in America. When did we become Greek Americans? It's another history altogether. And also my own personal journey. I'm not going to bore you with my own personal experience, except in highlighting some areas that do respond to the subject matter today and to the book that Professor Alexander Kitroeff put out. My first few years here in this country was late 60s, 67, when I first came in, and I got involved very briefly with the experience of the Greeks in Astoria. about a year and a half. That in itself had an impact on me, kind of waking me up from where I came from, Greece, where everything was prescribed in a way according to the church's situation and the political situation that we had back then. I came to a place where the Greek spirit, not so much the religious spirit, but the Greek spirit was very alive and very well formed. Then I enrolled at Hellenic College in Brookline, and there I encountered the Greek Americans. That was from all over the world, all over the country, for sure. That was the second and the third generation of Greek Americans, classmates and schoolmates of mine. The funny thing is that even in that particular environment in Brookline, those days there were only male students, that we didn't have any female presence. It was more a seminary. Even there, I saw something that I never experienced in any other place. Two things. One was the division between Greeks and American Greeks. We are the G's and the A's. Within the student body, there was this kind of division. And then the other experience that I had at the school in the beginning, that I did not have when I was in Greece and came to this country, was the presence and the engagement of people of African American descent. People who were there from Kenya, from Uganda, from different places. In Greece, the way I grew up, seen as someone who is a different color, was not, it didn't conjure up in my head any kind of emotions that they could be strong either way or the other. It was another human being, curiosity mostly. When I came to the school, I found out that although the church was engulfing these people with love, there was an inherent resistance between the black students and our own experience. That is something that later on became a little bit different in my upbringing. Suffice to say that my life changed fundamentally and foundationally when I went to Hellenic College and Holy Cross as a student, and thereafter as an integral part of the place for 40 years, because it was a kind of rebirth for me in the Greek American mentality. Civil rights, Vietnam War, campuses were in the middle of those days. So I found the debates, I found the postures. We had our own strike back then in 1971. We wanted to change everything, the whole world. Were quite exciting. It was something new for us. Hellenic College and Holy Cross Seminary, the role of the church in all of these issues was constantly discussed, debated, and many times attacked. I found that exhilarating. It was freeing. The church was also a very different experience for me than that I knew from Greece. In the US, the people, clergy, and especially the laity, were deeply immersed in all aspects of its life. They were building their parishes, but they were also deeply involved in setting the overall direction of the church in this country. The clergy laity congresses that I attended, all of them since 1970, if someone reads the documents of those clergy laity congresses, you'll see the high level of engagement on the issues that were very important and very alive those days for everyone in the Greek American community. And a well-meaning gentleman in the latter part of the 20th century, a church person, and during Archbishop Demetrius's tenure as an archbishop, the gentleman, a layperson, made a comment in one of our discussions that now we have peace, we can do a Congress, create Congress without having a fight. And let me tell you, I think there is not an issue of fight. It's an issue of being involved in the church that was going on back then. The lay people and the clergy were very much passionate about what the church is all about and should be. Of course, the Archbishop back then was Iakovos of blessed memory, and he engaged the people in ways that we were not accustomed because of his charismatic presence, his communication skills, and his vision for the church in America to take a place amongst the other religious on the same table. Much of that energy had to deal with Greek ethnic pride. And I mean that in a positive way. We believe as Greek people that we have made contributions to the world, and we like to lift up those contributions and share them. John Calamus and the Hellenic National Museum is a very great testimony to that. We also love our heritage and its expressive nature. Ideas like philoxenia and philotimo, but also our savoir vivre, the way that we live. That energy began to take more form as we also emerged from our Greek neighborhoods and our ethnic ghettos. Proverbial and common knowledge from Astoria, you move to Jackson Heights, and from there go to the island, the movement of the ethnics, and then someone else comes after you. Most of our parishes were formed in the suburbs, and then those non-ethnic neighborhoods. They were entered into the mainstream of American life and society and political life. The galvanizing moment for me, like many Greeks in the US at that time, especially the East Coast, was the 1974 Cyprus invasion and the almost simultaneous fall of the military dictatorship in Greece. At that moment, all of us flexed our collective muscle to respond, whether to help Greece emerge from the dictatorship and also to do what we would for the people of Cyprus. There was a personal connection with that particular invasion. A very promising young man from Cyprus named Doros Loizou, a wonderful poet. Those poems that he was able to produce, I think they are already circulated in Cyprus and in Greece, and they have been translated into English. He was a schoolmate of mine, and when the coup happened in Cyprus, he left and he became one of the close collaborators and workers with Archbishop Makarios. And in one of the attempts before the coup, he was killed with a car bomb. So the message was driven by that event in my life as well. And it was the church that gathered the people together on these days. If we jump ahead to today, in the intervening 40 or so many years, our community has changed very greatly. The reasons are well known and often commented upon. We are now entering the 5th generation of Greek Americans in the US. Both Drake, Herakis, and John Calamos, like the prophets of old, know what that means. Antonis Diamataras knows what it means. They have put their finger on those buttons that we need to push for the future of American Greek Orthodoxy, whichever way you want to understand it. The high rates of intermarriage, the high rates of people embracing Orthodox Christianity from other religious traditions. We have become one of the wealthiest and most highly educated groups in the United States. Professor Kitroeff made a good point about that. That means the ties that bound us so tightly are looser. While there are exceptions, of course, most of our parishes are not defined as strongly as they once were in the people from a particular village or region of Greece. That may be a stronghold in certain areas. Greece is a vacation place for many, but doesn't have the emotional hold that it did for our earlier generations. The stories of immigrant ancestors may still be told, thank God, for people like John Calamos. But today's young people especially are very far removed from that experience. This is the call for us, people like John Calamos, myself, Antonis, Bill Marianis, and everyone in this venue today. Economically, we made it. And we did not made it the same way that our ancestors made it. They work hard and earn their money with hard work. Today, we've gone through the corporate ladder. We have been graduated in a different kind of economic understanding. And of course, our people have reached quite high politically, where there is interest and goals must be more in the interest of goals of above an ethnic community. All of this has affected the church as well. In a nutshell, we have moved from being a culturally based community to a faith-based community. For many now in the church, we often see the most active members, the most involved, the most generous members are the non-Greek spouses, the converts to the faith. On any given Sunday, the majority of people attending the church may not be of Greek descent at all. Without the ethnic ties, they are involved because they have come to love the beauty of our Orthodox Christianity, its depth, its worship, and our still strong sense of community. Our faith is the guiding principles, as it should be, as we walk among our neighbors. So these are new challenges for us. How do we stay connected to one another as a community? How do we stay connected to our Hellenic heritage? How do we hand our Orthodox Christian faith to another generation, especially as the ethnic connection has changed so much? In other words, it's not enough to say I'm Greek, so I'm Orthodox. Now we even ask, what does it mean to be an Orthodox Christian? What is an Orthodox Christian? This has meant that the church has become more intentional in its work on these fronts. Our ministries serve to address these challenges, and our ministries continue to change in an attempt to meet them. An example from our metropolis in San Francisco, we have the Greek Language Institute, the Ελληνικό χωριό, the Greek village, where we teach the young children in an immersion way the language and its descendants, the culture, the FDF program. The 15 years that I've been in Metropolitan, I have witnessed that very strong shift of what it is culturally acceptable for us to give to our younger generation and what is not. And I'm going to close with an example of our place in the table. A few years back, I was in a celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day here in San Francisco, in the public square, outside the Moscone Center, for those of you who know of San Francisco. And they have invited me to say the prayer for the day. And I proceeded and I sat next to an elderly African-American gentleman who had a cane because he was quite old. And before I proceeded to sit down, he rose, and he would not sit down until I sat down. So I was curious why he did that. And I asked him. He said to me, "You're representing something more than you think you're representing right now for us," meaning the people who were there. He says, "My grandchildren and my children have been taught by me that the Greek Archbishop came and walked with these men that were here today in Selma, Alabama, so many years ago. That was the move for us, that your church is sensitive enough to understand which way the history goes and which way we will go as people in this country." That for me meant a great deal, because it says that I need to do something with this. I need to be able to say that Greek Americans are the people that want to have a change, want to see a better world, want to see orthodoxy, not simply triumphalistic orthodoxy, but the real one, to be action-oriented. I'm sorry I took too much time, and I apologize.
But those were important points, and especially your ending point, and we thank you for that wisdom, Your Eminence.
Thank you.
I would like to move on to our next guest, the Honorable Antonis Diamataras, publisher of the National Herald. He was born in Lemnos, Greece, and immigrated to the United States to continue his studies in the late 1960s. In 1979, he became the editor-publisher of the nation's oldest Greek-language newspaper, the National Herald, which he purchased from the late Eugene Rossides. Under Antonis' stewardship, the National Herald introduced weekly English and online editions. And then the Republic of Greece's Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis appointed Antonis as Deputy Minister for Expatriate Greeks. Under his tenure there, he undertook several campaigns to foster stronger ties with the diaspora. He left that post and he is now back as day-to-day publisher of the National Herald. Antonis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John, so much. And Your Eminence, it's very nice to see you. And I enjoyed your remarks very, very much.
Thank you.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here today to say a few words about the church and the community from my personal historical perspective. But first of all, I want to congratulate Drake Bechrakis, George Marcos, and Ardimopoulos for the great job they do at the Hellenic National Society. I also want to congratulate Jan Kalamos for the announcement they just made. I think it's great that two of the leading organizations. The Hellenic National Museum is a very important organization. And I'm very happy to hear that these two great organizations are going to be working together in preserving the Greek history in the United States. Some months ago, under the capacity that I was as the Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece for the Greeks abroad, as John said, I had the privilege of being present at the annual gathering of the National Hellenic Society. And as I said then, and as I wrote in a number of cases, I have to say that it was the most organized and substantial event that I have been to. And again, great job and bravo to all. You might know that I have been involved with the community as the publisher of the National Herald for more than 40 years. I'm by far the longest serving publisher in the history of the 105 years old newspapers, 105 years old. If one goes through the archives of the newspaper, and I will make an announcement today, very soon, we are going to have most of the archives in a digital format, free, Alexa, to all to go and see and work on. Well, if somebody were to see the archives of the paper, they will see there are a lot of space, by far the most space, in both our Greek newspaper and later in our English newspaper, is devoted to the issue of the church, Your Eminence. So I know something about the subject today. And that shows the fact that we devote so much time, so much space to the church. It shows to me, and I hope to everybody, an interdependence between the newspaper and the church and the community. The early part of our history as a community was very much affected by what was called ο μεγάλος διχασμός, the great schism between those who favored Eleftherios Venizelos and those who favored the king. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that. Ethnikos Kyrix was with Eleftherios Venizelos. And another newspaper at the time, Atlantis, was very much supportive of the king. When Venizelos was in power, he would appoint his own archbishops and even patriarchs. When the king was in power, you would have the opposite situation. To give you just a little example of how passionate and how divided the community was, Antonis, who was the founding publisher of Ethnikos Kyrix, left the Agia Triada, the cathedral church in New York, to establish a new church, Agios Eleftherios, Saint Eleftherios. Eleftherios, of course, was the name of Eleftherios Venizelos. As the years advanced, things quieted down, but not entirely for some time, as Alexander knows quite well, until after World War II, when Athinagoras became archbishop and later a patriarch. I spoke earlier about an interdependence between the archdiocese, the church, and the newspaper. Here is what I mean. The mission of the church and the newspaper are complementary, they're parallel. The church, of course, teaches and practices our religion, the word of God, to our people. At the same time, being that it's the Greek Orthodox Church is, or in my opinion at least, should promote our culture, our civilization, and yes, our language. More on this a little later. Of course, the mission of the newspaper is to inform, to report, to teach, and to help maintain all that makes us Greeks and Greek Americans: religion, language, culture, and civilization. So you see how these things too are interrelated. Some of you, I'm sure John, my friend John here, knows that over the past 40 years, we had a few disagreements with the archbishops as a newspaper event. And sometimes they were heated disagreements. Why was that the case? It was usually, if not always, about the management, the priorities, and the identity of the church. We expected more, Your Eminence, in this regard from Iakovos, whom you mentioned before, because he was Iakovos and he could. As we know, after Iakovos, the church, to put it mildly, underperformed to a dangerous degree until about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, when Archbishop Epiphidophorus came and has begun to turn the situation around. The fact that it almost went bankrupt, Mr. Kalamazan, says it all. I wouldn't want to say we told you so, but the fact is that we did. We could see it coming. But even though at times we were very outspoken, we were unable to prevent it. It was saved, as I said before, almost the very last moment. Now let's clear one thing. Let's make no mistake about it. We need the church. The church is the backbone of our community. We cannot do without the church as human beings and as a community. But we also need the paper to be financially independent in order to be able to act as the watchdog of all authorities and, of course, of the church as well. There has been a struggle, as Your Eminence spoke at some length. There has been a struggle within the community, and it has to do with the identity of the church. Is it an American church, where the language that we use is English? Or is it a Greek immigrant church, where the language that we use is Greek? At the beginning, of course, it was unquestionably a Greek church. Then we moved on to the fifth generation, as His Eminence stated. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who came into the picture. For the past few decades, where the American born have been many more than the Greeks from Greece like myself, we have the phenomenon that the church leadership is chosen from Constantinople. But the lay power lies within the American born. There's nothing wrong with that. I would argue that it's the best situation possible. I would argue that if it were ever to be cut from the mother church, the church in Constantinople, we would definitely be lost. I think we need the Patriarchate much more than we realize it. But to me, whether it's a Greek or an American church is a false dilemma. Why not be both? Why not have priests who know both languages? Why is it so difficult to get our priests to learn the Greek language? It doesn't have to be perfect, for crying out loud, but people have to know the language. After all, the Bible was written in Greek. But above all, let's make a determination. Because unless we have a clear mission, we cannot really succeed. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and allow me to say that I think I might have made it clear. This community is based upon two very important foundations. One, of course, is the church. On the other hand, allow me to say that the fact that this church and this community has been able not only to survive, but to succeed and to maintain what we have today, it's to a large extent attributable to the influence, to the passion, to the contribution of the Greek American media and this newspaper that I present in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonis, for your remarks, and they were very interesting, as you always are. Our next guest is Professor Alexander Kitroeff, Professor of History at Haverford College. He's considered one of the world's leading authorities on nationalism and ethnicity in modern Greece and its diaspora. He is a prolific author and has also taught, in addition to Haverford, where he's a professor at the American College of Greece, NYU, Temple, Princeton, Queens College, CUNY. His fellowships included work at other schools, including the Vrionis Center of Hellenism in Sacramento, California, and at Oxford University, where he received his PhD in modern history. Most significantly, he has now written what we expect to become, if it isn't already, the definitive book on the church in the United States, in America, The Greek Orthodox Church in America, A Modern History, a sweeping historical look. Professor, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for your kind words. I'm humbled. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be in this company. And it's so wonderful to hear that everyone is talking about history. Antonis talking about the digitalization of the most important newspaper in the history of Greek America, and the news that the Hellenic Museum is going to partner and do its own wonderful work. It's music to the eyes, to the ears of the historian. And I must say, Your Eminence, you've got to write your own memoir, because we need as many sources as possible about the history of the church. What I want to do this evening is just say, talk a little bit about the book. It was an idea that was planted in my mind following a documentary I was involved in, a documentary entitled The Journey, the Greek Dream in America, which was directed by Maria Iliou in 2007. And during that documentary, I heard myself saying that the Greek Orthodox Church is the most important institution in the history of Greek America. And I didn't mean to say that it's just one of several other institutions and it's the most important. No, I think it's something it's in its own category as far as we are historians are concerned. It's a spiritual home as well. But it was, we say it's the most important institution comparing it to others because it played such an important role in shaping the identity of Greek America. And I remember the aftermath of the screening of the premiere that took place at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Two people came up to me right after that and said, "You've got to do a biography of Archbishop Iakovos." They were Father Alex Karloutsas and Catherine Bura, who was the general consul in New York a few years later. Katerina and I were graduate students in England a long time ago, so I know her from then. And she told me, "Alexandre, Archbishop Iakovos needs to be studied." When I had time to look at that issue, I realized that I could not write a biography of Archbishop Iakovos because there was no general overall history of the church. There were wonderful works by theologians, including Father Dimitris Konstantelos, but they were not works that looked at the sociological history, as His Eminence said, of the church. They were mostly theological studies, extremely good, but nothing in terms of the interface between the church and the community, which interested me because I was basically a historian, not a theologian. So I decided to begin by doing this overall history of Greek Orthodoxy in America. And I was able to do so, first of all, with a very generous grant from the Chaharis Family Foundation that enabled me to spend time in New York to do the research at the archives of the Archdiocese. As you know, it's not cheap to live in New York, so I needed some significant financial support. So that was the first very important step. The other second equally important step was that the Archdiocese has excellently kept archives. I can't say enough. Those archives are so diligently gathered. They have correspondence from 1922 onwards, newspaper clippings. There are even newspaper clippings critical of the church. They gathered everything. And with the help of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, all this paper material was transformed into PDFs. Therefore, they are much more easy to access for researchers. And in the archives themselves, there's a wonderful person, Mrs. Niki Calais, who basically knows the history of the Archdiocese better than anyone. She was a very close collaborator with Archbishop Iakovos for many years, and she very generously, off the record, shared her views, her memories, and she was wonderful at directing me, sending me to places where what I should look at, what I should do. The material is so vast that I decided to focus on the clergy laity congresses, and through the clergy laity congresses, look at the changing relationship between church and community. And the study really addresses the 20th century. I was concluding, when I was working, Archbishop Dimitrios was still Archbishop, and it felt a bit odd writing the history of a church when the Archbishop was still in his place. So it concludes it's really about the 20th century, and I have a section that addresses the era of Archbishop Spiridon, the era of Archbishop Dimitrios, and the appointment of Archbishop Elpidophoros. But throughout that study, the towering figure in the church is Archbishop Iakovos. The study may not be a biography of Iakovos because I needed to do the background. Archbishop Athinagoras was very important. Archbishop Michael in the 50s was also very important. But really, Archbishop Iakovos is a towering, inspiring figure. And I found myself sitting in the basement of the Archdiocese, reading the Archbishop's addresses at the clergy laity congresses, and just being overwhelmed by his vision, his power, his force of personality. He was an inspired leader. He was charismatic. He was authoritarian. There were many, many sides to his character. And as Father Robert Stephanopoulos says in the documentary we did with Maria Iliou, not all his decisions may have been the right ones, but they were certainly taken with force and the interest of the Church in mind. If I were to summarize the message that I tried to convey, the message is that the Church, especially under Iakovos, very, very successfully transitions in what Antonis mentioned. It transitions from an immigrant church to becoming an American church. It's very clear. Archbishop Iakovos starts saying, we are no longer an immigrant church. He's saying it in the late 60s, 64 at the Denver Congress. There is this Congress in 1970 in New York where there's a huge controversy over the use of Greek in the liturgy. He continues saying that. And by the 1980s, he's got an important ally, the sociologist Charles Moskos, who's also saying that the church is now an American church. But if from a historical point of view, the fact that the church remains strong and transitions from being an immigrant church and retains its relevance when its members are now the children of the immigrants and the grandchildren of the immigrants, and it's an American church, but yet the church, which after all is based on tradition of all institutions, orthodoxy is based on tradition. Nonetheless, it negotiates between tradition and being open and understanding the Americanization that's taking place, especially as was said in the suburbs of America. That's a very, very important transition. So I think in the 20th century, the success of the church is that it follows the trajectory of Greek America from immigrant to American, and in doing that, shapes that transition and in a sense helps it happen because it adapts and people are comfortable with their church as it Americanizes. And yes, I think there's a shift in identity. And a lot of Greek Americans identify now first as Orthodox and secondly maybe as Greeks. In the final part, that when I looked at the periods of Archbishops Spiridon, Dimitrios, and especially the change with Archbishop Elpidophoros, I saw that there was another big change that the church was able to respond to. And that is, I think, whilst throughout the 20th century, the church had to adapt to the changes of America, from about 1989, the end of the Cold War and the beginning of this era of globalization, it was the ecumenical patriarchate that became much more important in the life of Orthodoxy in this era of globalization. So I think Archbishop Elpidophoros being welcomed so warmly by the Greek America indicates to me that a lot of Greek Americans are aware that their church had to adapt to the changes in America throughout the 20th century, but now with the dawn of the 21st century, the church has become so important in Orthodoxy, it has to take into account the changes on a global scale. And in that sense, it becomes a very, very important institution in terms of supporting the ecumenical patriarchate. back in when Athinagoras was ecumenical patriarch in the 1950s and 1960s, the patriarchate stood on its own. But in the era of globalization and interconnectedness, the role of the Greek Orthodox Church in America and the help it can give to the ecumenical patriarchate becomes critical. That's why I think the end of Archbishop Iakovos's era, when the ecumenical patriarchate wanted to increase its relationship with Greek America, that period was turbulent, bumpy, because people couldn't adapt to the new circumstances. But now, with the coming of Archbishop Elpidophoros, I think the Greek Church in America has entered a new phase in its historical trajectory, aware of its global reach and global implications.
Thank you very much, Professor. I hope I didn't cut you off there.
Not at all. I just wanted to say I hope this is the beginning. I think there's so much more to be studied in the history of the church.
There is, and we have come to the end of the hour, but we would like to extend it for another 10 or 15 minutes. And I'd like to give you some equal time, so maybe I could pose the first question to you, Professor. The church has evolved, and yet I recall when I was a boy, we had friends who came and visited from Montreal, Greek Canadian friends, and they spoke to us about their Greek Orthodox schools in Montreal and how Archbishop Iakovos was handling that. And it was my impression that even though they were Canadian and I was American, we were part of the same homogenia. I no longer get that sense. We're administratively divided now. To what extent has the embrace and the need to defend Constantinople, which we all feel, come at the expense of our unity as Orthodox Christians in America?
So I think there are some differences between the United States and Canada from the point of view of immigration. I'm talking now as an immigration historian. Canada has a different policy towards its ethnic groups. It's more supportive. The United States, America, is more assimilative. It allows ethnicity, but it wants you to become an American. The Greek Canadians, who are mostly post-World War II immigrants, have been able to retain more of a Greekness, let's say, a Greekness connected with Greece. And I think the administrative division of the church, I think, is a positive step, because it allows Orthodoxy to adapt to the particular circumstances that obtain in the United States as compared to Canada. And then what needs to be done, of course, is now that Orthodoxy adapts to those two different environments, it's up to Orthodoxy to bring those two branches of Greek Orthodoxy together.
All right, I thank you for that. Let me just shift gears very quickly because I want to come back to that, but there are some other subjects, and I know that His Eminence is able to address this one, and that has to do with the COVID pandemic that we have had that has changed the way we live here in the United States and around the world. What are your thoughts about possible long-term effects of this on the church? I know there have been many controversies over Holy Communion and other issues. What is your view on the pandemic?
Let me briefly turn your question on its head. How, instead of how the COVID and the pandemic will affect us, to what extent we are ready to seize the moment and make this pandemic a starting point for us to look at the younger generation of Greek Orthodox throughout this country and how they have received messages through this pandemic. The issue of bringing the church to the 21st century it's not something that you and I will do, but it will have to happen organically from the communities of the archdiocese under the auspices of the archbishop and the synod. The lessons that we learn through this pandemic is that we can reach our people in very different ways through the media that we have right now in our disposal. Before we began this discussion today, we had a little bit of a chat, if you remember, talking about this new understanding of seeing each other, being with each other. That the challenge is that Orthodox ethos and culture, it's an Orthodox, it's something that you want to press the flesh, you want to hug, you want to see, you want to celebrate. And that's something that it's not possible at this point. There's many examples that we need to understand that the youth of today is teaching us. Professor Kitroeff, you talk about globalization. These are the places where our youth reside today. They are away from each other by a click of a button. So the pandemic made it even more intense, brought the people more closer to each other, but through different means. Question for the church, are we going to take that kind of a challenge and do something with that for the sake of the culture, for the sake of the faith? I mean, the optic of Archbishop Elpidophoros holding the Black Lives Matter in Brooklyn, New York, has many of those messages that we even, all of us, the grown-ups, we have perhaps a little bit more, we need to take a second look. The young people are a little bit more forthright when it comes down to understanding themselves as members of a community that is not necessarily, does not necessarily have the same moorings that it had one generation ago.
Thank you so much for that answer. Antonis, I want to move on to you and follow up on your comments about the Greek language. This has been an issue that your newspaper has covered over the decades. And you outlined a vision, and I too very much love to hear the Greek and the English spoken as a Greek American born here. But in the creed that we pronounce in church every Sunday, it says we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It says nothing about a Greek church. And is it possible to keep the next generation in the church unless we make some accommodations? And, for those of us who grew up in New York, we know that in other parts of the United States, it's a very different issue when it comes to the Greek language.
John, let me first say that I want to congratulate Alexandros for the book that he wrote. I think it's a very important and useful work that he did that we will be using for the next many, many years. So Alexandros is a friend of mine, but has nothing to do with that. His work is extremely, extremely important. Now, to respond to your question, John, I believe that today, and even more importantly, tomorrow, it will be very easy, or much easier than ever before in the past, for our generations, for our children, to learn the Greek language, the history, the civilization. All it takes, as His Eminence said, is a click to speak to somebody in Crete, in Limnos, or any other place in the world. All it takes is Google it, and it will tell you what Athenagoras was. All it takes is Google it, and it will see who Plato was. In today's world, in the interconnection, in this globalization, it's important for our generations to know where they come from. And they don't have to depend upon some book at the university library to do that. It's easy to do it. It's easy to understand and to find out that where the parents came from, or grandparents, what they did in this country, the sacrifices, the progress, the struggle, the success stories. They're very important. They should be proud of it, and they should try to maintain it. I believe that it's a question of really making a decision and trying to do it. It's not going to be easy. Who says it will be easy? But it's a time to start, especially now, with Episcopal Pedophoros and all of those social media. I mean, look at this. Alexandros is in Athens, John Calamos is in Chicago, and you're in Manhattan, I'm on Long Island. San Francisco, and we're speaking like brothers. So this is the challenge. We can do it.
All right. Thank you, Antonis. Let me pose the next question to Professor Kitroeff. The term Greek has meant so many different things in history. There's the classical conception of what Greek meant. The Bible speaks of Greek and Jew. Archbishop Demetrios always used to say that the Greek Orthodox Church is Greek as the Roman Orthodox, the Roman Catholic Church is Roman, in other words, culturally perhaps. And then finally, we have the idea of the Greek Church as immigrants from the nation state of Greece. Are we confused because of who we are, because of the nomenclature in part? And what does it mean to be Greek Orthodox? And if you could unmute your mic, please.
How long do we have left to discuss it? I think there's a richness to all these aspects that you mentioned. There's a wonderful richness to the meaning of Greek Orthodoxy. The truth is, in the beginning, what happened was when the Greeks arrived here, there was the Russian Orthodox Church, but they made the decision to establish their own churches, and eventually we had the establishment of the Archdiocese. So again, speaking as an immigration historian, our church is what is known as an ethno-religious church. So the Greek means different things. It means ethnic Greek as well as culturally Greek. And as we know, Greek is a synonym for Eastern Orthodox, which is a broader category beyond the languages. People think, and you know, as Professor Vrionis said, I'm a historian. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but people say that maybe in the long term, if the language erodes, then one would have an Eastern Orthodox Church in America that might be primarily English and use the Greek and the other languages in addition to English. And in that sense, then the Greek would become cultural. But at the moment, there's this. We're not confused, but we're living with dual meanings. It's both ethnic and cultural.
Thank you for that explanation. I fear we may only have time for one more question, and I want to ask His Eminence, because you were the deacon to Archbishop Iakovos. You worked closely alongside him. What were the qualities that he had as a leader in the church? And what can we say about where he was taking the church, perhaps towards greater unity with other Orthodox? And is his vision still valid?
The vision of unified Orthodox in America, I think, has to be viewed from the point of view of today's experiences and the recent experiences. The role of the ecumenical patriarchate is firmly rooted in any kind of unification that we may attempt to do in this country. That was different back in the time when the Archbishop was Iakovos and his own understanding. You understand that his tenure as Archbishop has been studied very well. And Professor Kitroeff says that since when you were a student, people asking you to do that in the history of the 20th century Orthodox America. But why? What was so unique about him? First of all, he was a good communicator, a communicator par excellence. Reading his speeches and encyclicals like Professor Kitroeff did, one, you get transfixed in his ability to move and motivate the people. So it was a personal charisma that he had. Second, he wanted to ensure that our church had a seat at the table of important issues of the day, that he had a voice in them. So he continued the work of his predecessors of having Orthodox Christianity recognized as a major religion. From my experience with him, I never partook or experienced him the issue of the Ligonier attempt. What I saw in him, from my point of view, it was a person who was thirsting to see the voice of the Orthodox together, so they can have a little bit more strength, a little bit more power, a little bit more importance. Very practical purpose that he wanted to have that kind of understanding. So he and Athinagoras, both of them, they made the people in the United States to ask, who are these Greek Orthodox? Who are these people? So people took notice, especially with the civil rights movement, as I said, the ecumenical movement, and the Cyprus crisis. Third is the same tensions that we have in the rest of our community. Fully Greek and fully American. Antonis said that in a very wonderful way. On that day of September 11th, the 9/11, I was told, I was not there, I was told that the first thing that Iakovos did is got up, picked up the American flag, went outside his door and plucked the flag outside his door. He made a statement. Make statement when you are in a position of that kind of importance, you have to make a statement that reflects what you have in your heart. You cannot be phony. And he wasn't. So he made a statement that we're here, we're a part of this process that we call America, and we're going to fight together. He had a vision for it, and he gave it to us. Archbishop Elpidophoros has wonderful, great promise and great qualities, I think, in the same vein. And I'm hoping that we will continue somehow connecting the one with the other down the road, but in a different kind of capacity. Each one of these men who become important in our lives as Orthodox Christians, they have their own gifts.
Well, I thank you for those inspirational words and those optimistic words about where we're all heading. And we really do need that optimism at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I thank all of our panelists today, Your Eminence, you're most graciously spending your time with us. Professor, thank you for joining us so late from Greece. And you're staying up, it must be past midnight now, but we really appreciate it. Time for dinner now.
Yeah, exactly.
Many thanks to the National Hellenic Society for having this venue for us, this platform for us to share some ideas for the future of our Greek American community. Many thanks to them. Grateful.
We are grateful for that. And Antonis, thank you so much for your words and your many years of service to journalism. which is something that that is close to my heart. So
Likewise.
we thank you, and I'm John Metaxas. Thank you for watching. I'm now going to turn it over to my good friend, my fellow attorney, my fellow archon, and a man of faith, Bill Marianis.
Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody. I also want to echo, as a member of the board of directors of the National Hellenic Society, none of this would have been possible without the distinguished content that were provided by each of our three incredible presenters. So, Your Eminence, Metropolitan, Gerasimos, phenomenal job. Thank you so very much for your leadership and for continuing those various causes you talked about. Dr. Kitroeff, I mean, not only did you get a ringing endorsement for your current book, which everybody must get, we've also set the foundation for now you need to write book 2, because we have another chapter beginning over here. So if I were you, I'd get started writing, because you have this role to keep this history going and give us part 2. And Antonis, again, thank you very much for being that third pillar in there on that role. I do want to comment, this is kind of a way, you focus very vigorously on the importance of having a strategy for the clergy and the laity and clarity of your mission. And I just wanted to plug His Eminence Metropolitan Gerasimos, who was the very first hierarch within our church to actually go through a strategic planning process years ago, back before it was popular. So a wonderful time to do that. I just want to kind of close by reminding everybody that's listening a little bit about to what all three of our speakers said is the mission of the National Hellenic Society. And I just want to focus on it real quickly to remind you that our job as the National Hellenic Society is to preserve Hellenic heritage through supporting and initiating programs that support our values and culture, benefit our members and their families, honor our ancestors through an enduring network of accomplished Greek Americans focused on tradition, fellowship, and enrichment, and to try and fulfill that mission statement. In the efforts of supporting our values and culture, we are strong supporters of the church, and again, we thank His Eminence for being here. We are forming that partnership with the National Hellenic Museum to create those oral histories, and these very NHS talks, which have begun with such great candor and are going to expand beyond that, is part of supporting our values and culture. With respect to honoring our ancestors, I hope you all have seen the Greek Guide to Greatness programs that have been out there, and more recently, the Cliffs of Freedom movie that was sponsored by Dean and Marianne Metropolis, with whom the National Hellenic Society is partnering on an even greater basis. So in an effort to continue to honor our ancestors, we're continuing that hard work. With regard to establishing an enduring network, we have chapters in all major cities, and we're providing mentoring opportunities for all the young men and women that go through our Heritage Greek program. And Antonis, just so you know, we've now had a partnership with corresponding youth in Greece, and using, to His Eminence's point, the technology that we have available to us now, our Greek alumni that went through our Heritage Greece program are actually doing Greek lessons for our American Hellenic Heritage alumni. And so the partnership in continuing that tradition is really strong. With respect to our tradition, there could be no greater sentiment than the sentiment that our chairman has just announced with John Calamos and our incredible partnership with the Hellenic Museum, which is the preeminent storing house of all of that. If you've never been to Chicago, you need to do that. And the addition of our Heritage America program, where we're looking at our tradition here as Greek Americans in the United States. On fellowship, we have the preeminent website, MyParea, and I hope you get a chance to take a look at all the extraordinary resources that are on MyParea. And normally we have our Heritage Weekend and Classic every year where we come together. It's what the professor and His Eminence and Antonis had referred to. Unfortunately, with the COVID crisis and our current plans to be in California, I don't know, Your Eminence, you're going to have to talk to the governor there and see if we can do anything. But we are committed to continuing that fellowship through all of these resources. And then finally, with regard to enrichment, our hallmark program is our Heritage Greece program, where we take the most promising Greek American young men and women, and we immerse them in Greece and let them understand what it means to be a Greek American and the rich traditions that they have. And so that's really kind of all of the actually not all, but some of the many things we're trying to do through the National Hellenic Society to fulfill our actual mission. And with over 500 Heritage Greece alumni now, we are creating an army of people to take this process to the next step. But none of it could have happened without the visionary founders of this organization, George Marcus, our distinguished colleague who's on with us today, John Calamos, and of course, everybody's favorite comedian, George Corcus, and many of the others that were there at the beginning to really get this organization started and to look at it and see the passing to the next generation. See, I'm part of the older generation, I can say this, but to see the John Metaxases of the world, an extraordinary, great media personality coming forth and doing these NHS talks, the incredibly inspired daily, hourly, minute-by-minute leadership of Art Dimopoulos, our executive director, and even the new chairman, not so new anymore, but Drake Barakis, who continues the great traditions of our predecessors, including his family. We can be secure that the future of promoting Hellenism in America will be maintained. Finally, we want to thank anybody and everybody who listens to this program. If you're interested in learning any more about how to preserve Hellenic heritage or honor our ancestors or be a part of a network that's focused on tradition and fellowship and enrichment, we invite you to learn more about the National Hellenic Society and join our mission to protect and preserve our cultural heritage and faith. Everybody, thank you so very much. John, thank you very much. And I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Good night,
God
everybody.
bless. God bless all and be healthy.
Be safe and be healthy, and your families. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.